We are focused on understanding persuasion, for example, and persuasion and using persuasion to promote positive behaviors and pro-social behaviors is something distinct out of the marketing skill set. And this is one way that marketing scholars have been and can continue to promote pro-social behavior as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. So as marketing scholars, another area that we specialize in is customer segmentation. And as you can imagine, companies are increasingly trying to find ways to expand their business, either by developing deeper relationships with their existing customers or by expanding their customer base to include new customer segments. As firms engage in customer segmentation, it's important that they understand that their existing customer needs are constantly evolving, and the new customer segments might have completely different needs, goals, behaviors that they're faced with. One of the things in my own research that I'm interested in is increasing access to quality health care for everyone. And previous research has shown that when people have access to good health care, when they are highly engaged in that health care, this can lead to both positive health outcomes and reduced healthcare costs. So in a recent project that I worked on with my co-authors, we looked at how consumers might differ in the extent to which they engage in their healthcare, depending on the extent to which their illness was stigmatized. And as you can imagine, this is particularly relevant right now. So, some illnesses come to mind that are highly stigmatized. For example, if you think about mental health conditions or sexual health conditions, these can be highly stigmatized. But of course, aspects of the COVID-19 virus can also be stigmatized in some cases. On the one hand, contracting COVID-19 can bring with it some sense of stigma. But even getting vaccinated to prevent the COVID-19 in the first place has been stigmatized in some cases. And it's not really surprising that this happened, because stigma tends to be heightened when an illness is perceived as visible, when it's perceived as contagious. And if you look at, some of the recent variants of COVID, they're highly contagious, when they're perceived as controllable. And so this idea of, the role of the vaccine in reducing the potential of, someone passing along the disease, or the extent to which people are engaging in pro-social behaviors, such as wearing masks or social distancing, is also sort of a facet of this controllability. And then also this area of permanence. And, when you think about the idea that we're still trying to make sense of long COVID, this is sort of another dimension that creates this perfect storm in which the COVID-19 can have a lot of these cues that would signal stigma. So in fact, the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing was one of the first journals in marketing to publish a series that was specifically focused on tackling questions related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and to establish a corresponding research agenda. So for instance, this was published online in May of 2020, so very early on in the pandemic. And these topics were ranging from things like how to manage the supply chain, how to make sure against the backdrop of the pandemic that the poor and the elderly have access to healthy food, understanding from a psychological standpoint how consumers cope with scarcity, understanding the role of race. We know that underrepresented racial minorities in this country were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Navigating the role of marketing as it relates to pharmaceuticals against the backdrop of the pandemic. Looking at one of the pieces is a cross-disciplinary piece that is a collaboration between a marketing scholar and a climate scientist to look at that relationship between climate change and ongoing pandemics. And one of the things I'm really thrilled about is the fact that SAGE made all of the pandemic-related content open access. So all of those pieces, and there are others that were part of that early agenda setting series on the COVID-19 pandemic, are all open access and available to the public based on SAGE's policy. So I think that that is really outstanding. I was really thrilled about that. Certainly, the pandemic has changed the way we interact with other people. As marketing scholars, one of the things that we are experts in is understanding how environmental factors all around us, social factors, and psychological factors all come together to shape our behaviors. And without question, the pandemic has influenced how we must interact with our environment. Now, when we go shopping, we need to put on a mask. We need to social distance. Some products are scarce. All of those are environmental cues. It's also influencing how we interact with other people. We need to keep our distance. We need to signal to other people that we're interested not only in our own well-being, but also in the well-being of those around us. And certainly all of that is affecting us psychologically because it's taxing to us emotionally as well as cognitively. So I think that these are areas where marketing scholars can contribute, have contributed. I think there's certainly still much that we don't understand, but I do think that examining these questions against the backdrop of this more lofty goal of focusing on the greater good as it can benefit individuals, communities, and the environment is going to be the best path forward for all of us. I think the way media and other stakeholders have often maybe misperceived marketing is to have the idea that marketing is limited to finding ways to get people to buy things they don't need or want. And certainly there is work that has looked at that, and but I think in fact marketing is much more than that. Increasingly, marketing scholars have become concerned with what we call responsible marketing. And although those issues haven't always been the focus of our scholarship, the fact is they are now. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are sometimes called the SDGs, can provide one lens for businesses and researchers to think about how to prioritize their work. And the reason they're so important is because they're proposing this global partnership between countries around the world, and businesses play a part in that, in helping to promote peace and prosperity for all people in the world. And as a researcher myself, these goals have provided a guidepost for me in terms of how I think about my research, my teaching, and my service. And for my own research, I tend to collaborate with businesses, with agencies that are trying to promote positive policies to help make the world better. And I think that as a marketing scholar, we have this toolkit of rigorous research approaches that we can use to help advance those goals, to help tackle some of the grand challenges that we face in society, especially around the areas, for example, of promoting financial stability and better health among the world's most vulnerable populations and among underrepresented populations.